Good evening. My name is Shin-Yi Pai, and I'm the Program Director at Town Hall. On behalf of the staff at Town Hall Seattle and our friends at Third Place Books, it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's virtual discussion with Richard Culatta and Margaret Morris, presented in partnership with Seattle's Child. As we get underway, I would like to acknowledge our institution stands on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. Town Hall is adding new events and podcasts every day. Upcoming events include a discussion with Michelle Miller-Fisher and Amber Winnick on their book, Designing Motherhood, Things That Make and Break Our Burrs, and Susan Orlean on our relationship with animals. Visit our website to join our email list and get the latest updates as more programs are added throughout the season. If you share in Town Hall's vision for a robust community engaged in the arts, science, and culture where everyone has a voice, please consider supporting Town Hall tonight by donating or becoming a member. Tonight's presentation will be about 60 minutes, including Q&A. To streamline our audience experience, we've changed the Q&A platform for our events. To submit your question, please use your phone or computer to enter app.meet.ps/Culatta. We'll drop this link in the chat, and when we get to the Q&A portion, we'll remind folks again where to go. We can't guarantee that we'll be able to address every question, but we'll try to get to as many as possible. Please keep your questions concise and in the form of a question. For those who would like to view the program with closed captions, click the CC button in the bottom right corner of the video player. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Our Arts and Culture series is supported by For Culture, Arts Fund, the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, the Neshholm Family Foundation, and Wyncote Foundation Northwest. Finally, Town Hall is a member-supported organization, so I'd like to thank all of our members watching from home. Lastly, you'll want to dive deeper into this evening's topic by purchasing a copy of the author's book. Please use the link in the chat below to pick up your copy through Third Place Books. Richard Culatta is the CEO of the International Society for Technology and Education, or ISTE, a nonprofit serving education leaders in 127 countries. Prior to joining ISTE, Richard was Chief Innovation Officer for the state of Rhode Island and was appointed by President Barack Obama to lead the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Educational Technology from 2013 to 2015. Margaret Morris is a clinical psychologist focused on how technology can support well-being. She is an affiliate faculty member in the Information School at the University of Washington and a research consultant. Morris is the author of Left to Our Own Devices, Outsmarting Smart Technology to Reclaim Our Relationships, Health, and Focus. Culatta's new book, Digital for Good, Raising Kids to Thrive in an Online World, is the subject of this evening's discussion. Please join me in welcoming Richard Culatta and Margaret Morris.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to interview Richard about his great book, which I've enjoyed reading and learned a lot from. I thought, Richard, we'd open by just talking a little bit about how you made the transition from, or what prompted you to make the transition from, working with Obama, informing or guiding policy at the national level, to really working at the level of individual families, right? And giving parents pretty detailed day-to-day advice about how to manage things like, a daughter asking for a new phone or to download a particular app. So, yeah.
Well, I can give you a couple answers there. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here, and to the Town Hall Seattle team, it's just a great honor to be part of this conversation tonight. But I'll tell you, there are kind of two answers I could give to that question. So one, the first answer I will give, and both are true, by the way, the one answer I will give is as I worked at a national level on education policy, as we looked at technologies, we worked with developers, both the sort of big platforms in Silicon Valley, but also with schools and school leaders, and looking at what was happening there. The more clear it became to me what an important role families have in creating their, setting their kids up for success in a digital world, right? We know, of course, families are critical for a whole variety of reasons, but particularly around this area of how to use technology in meaningful, enriching ways. That just became clearer and clearer. And so that was sort of building the whole time that I was working for the White House. But I think the other part is I have 4 kids. My oldest daughter is 16 years old. My youngest son is just turned 8, and I have 2 in between. And we have these moments in our families. We were saying, how do we figure this out? And I remember, at one point my wife turned to me and she said, this is what you do. Like, this is your career. How come why don't you have some of these answers? And that started a bit of a quest for me to go and look and see what advice and guidance there was for families on how to create a healthy tech culture in their homes. And most of the books that were out there were just shocking to me. They were so negative. They were called things like the dumbest generation, how tech is making our kids stupider, and the boogeyman in your pocket, and all these like scare things. And I was like, that's just not lining up with what I'm seeing, right? Not only with my own kids, but when I would travel, in my job, I get to visit with schools and families all around the world. I was seeing creative, excited, good kids that just needed a bit more scaffolding on how they use technology in order to do it well. And so that's really where it came from. So yes, from a lot of work at a national level, but a lot of it was just from being at home, being a parent, trying to work through making a lot of these important decisions and having, frankly, really crappy guidance out there. Mm-hmm. And so trying to find something that was really practical in answering some of these questions that families have.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you at various points you sympathize with parents who want to bury their head in the sand or lock their kids in their room and just with banning all technology, but then end up suggesting like a really nuanced path, right? That is not about time, right? It's not about any sort of like really cookie cutter metric, right? It's more about, at one point, kind of towards the end of the book, you describe it in terms of aligning technology with the culture of a family, right? Yeah. And can you say a little bit more about that deliberate focus on culture at the level of a family?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of this is one of the books that I found very helpful for me was a book by Clay Christensen. And he wrote a book called How You'll Measure Your Life. Some people have read that. And one of the things that he talks about is creating an effective family culture and talking about what do you want your family to stand for? What do you want to be about? And it's okay that it's different. In some families, some things are funny that aren't in others. In some families, there are goals that exist that don't. And this idea of creating a family culture really resonated with me. And I think it's really important. And so I build on that in the book. And I just say, we also need to have a technology culture in our families that supports what the family culture is that we want to create. And so if part of what we do as a family is help be engaged with our community, we should know and we should model using technology to connect with our community. If part of our family culture is being connected with our family members, that we have, that's important for us to stay connected with cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents and whatever, then we should use technology to help support that. If there are things that we're interested in, being creative, learning new things, all of those activities can and should be supported by technology. So I love that idea. But what I found when I've talked to families about this is they often spend very little time. And look, we did too. I'm going to own anything I talk about here where a mistake has been made. I did it too. Like, I own all of this just as much. And so in our family, we spent very little time in most families I talked to talking about what their digital culture should be. What type of people do we want to be? How do we want to show up in virtual spaces? What are things that we stand for in virtual spaces? What are things that we use technology to do? What are things that we never want to do with technology? And that is it's the foundation that we have to set in order to be effective and successful. And what I found is if that can be set first, if there's that sort of groundwork, those conditions can be set, and kids, especially if they're older kids, can be involved in creating that culture, a lot of the other downstream problems get a lot easier to manage. Right. And that's sort of why it's so important. Like, if the culture's set right, the other stuff can be easier to deal with.
That's interesting. I think, probably for a lot of families, their culture is implicit, or even the sort of analog culture, right, is maybe attributed to just a heritage, And I wonder if you could talk about how you had those discussions about both, your culture offline and culture online. If there is such a division in your home, and how were your kids a part of shaping that? Is that a dynamic thing? did you have like influences? Just curious. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a lot there. A lot of places we could go. So one thing I'll just start with is this idea of digital culture versus like, physical world culture. And in the book, in Digital for Good, I make a really clear distinction throughout the book of the physical world and the digital world. And I compare back and forth. And it's funny because, some people said, so why did you do that? Why make such a big deal? It's just a world we live in. We just live in a world and there's some tech and there's some not tech. What do we? And the reason it's so important to make that distinction is that, well, yes, we do. And of course, we shift back and forth between digital and physical world environments all the time, 100 times a day, if not more, right? But the way that we conduct ourselves, the tools that we use, the strategies that we use to be effective humans, and especially to prepare our children to be effective humans, are very different in digital spaces. And so one of the big problems that I've seen around the world as I've traveled around the world talking about this is that we say, well, we as a family, I teach my kids to be courteous. I teach my kids to be respectful of others. And when we talk about what that looks like, almost all of that teaching is done in physical environments. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, it's just the way our brains work, right? Things that we learn in a particular context, it's very hard to transfer them into a different context. I mean, look, Margaret, it's the way we all have done this in school where, you can get an A in your math class and then be like trying to do some simple, calculating a tip at the restaurant. Like, wait, why don't I? Or there are many other better examples of this where something that we can learn and do well in school, we have a hard time applying in a real life situation. Mm-hmm. It's hard to apply concepts in one context to another. It's just how our brains work. It's why I'm a pilot, by the way. I like to fly planes. It's why pilots, when they practice, use simulators, because they need to get as close to the actual environment as possible when, to be able to recover from an emergency. That's the reason why it's so important that we talk about digital culture, that we talk about what are we doing to prepare our kids to be successful in a digital world, because the stuff that we teach in the physical world, it doesn't just transfer. It doesn't just roll over. And so if we want to teach skills like being courteous, being respectful, being curious in a digital world, we have to actually show it and model that in the digital world too.
Yeah, I liked some of the examples that you had of like saying aloud to your kids, like, oh, we're having a family council now. It's just the parents on the call, but we're discussing X, Y, and Z. Or I'm emailing this person, I'm emailing the neighbors about a blood drive or something. And did you find your behaviors changed because there was like this necessity to role model, like these pro-social ways of being?
Oh, 100%. And by the way, that's this interesting kind of, when I was writing the book, there's a lot of things that were basic foundations that I knew, from research that I'd done. But then there were some interesting things that I discovered along the way as I had a chance to talk to parents and kids and families. And that was one of them. So it's this idea that we have these things that we do on our devices that are often things that we, as parents, we may be helping our neighbors. We may be engaged with the community. We may be doing great things. But to a kid who's just looking, there's no discernible difference between that and just checking email for work or playing, Candy Crush or whatever, right? Like the only way, in the physical world, that's different. If we're walking down the street and there's a bag of chips that somebody left on the ground, some litter, and I pick that up and I throw it away, that is a very observable act, right? Mm-hmm. But I could do that same equivalent. I could be doing something to be helpful, to be, pushing for a cause that I care about, to help a neighbor, in a virtual world, and to an onlooker, to a kid, all it looks like, again, is just more email or more Facebook time. And so it's so important that we actually call that out and involve kids. Hey, I'm making this poster for a blood drive at church this week. Come take a look. What do you think? Or like, I'll be there in a second. I'm trying to, I'm registering to vote, or like all of that stuff that happens in this opaque space, we have to make tangible to kids who can't see it otherwise, like they can in the physical world.
Yeah. One of the, for me, one of the things, well, there's a couple of big topics, but I think, one of the things that I really appreciate about your book is that it really elevates the conversation about effective parenting with technology, and from a concern just about safety or protecting one's, little household, to things like improving the quality of life, improving learning, improving creativity. And I wonder if you could just, talk about some of those things. Maybe we'll start with learning, because I think that, there's sort of these pretty archaic ideas that if you're on your phone or on a device, you're not doing real learning. Or some of these things come up anyways as people are talking about technology. But I wonder if you could talk about, using technology in a way that, is a learning experience or a growth experience.
Sure. I would love to. Thank you for asking that. So it's funny. So, again, in my book, in my work, obviously one of the things we talk a lot about is how to keep kids safe online. And it's incredibly important. Look, if we've seen some of the articles, the Wall Street Journal article that just came out about Instagram and other things, like safety is super, super important. We can talk a little bit more about it. But I often worry, I'm like, what a low bar. Like, if all we're trying to do is keep kids safe online, that's just ridiculously low. I don't want to just keep kids safe. I want kids to be amazing, thriving, incredible people in virtual spaces. And so I think it's really important that we lift our sights up a bit, instead of just being safe, to being amazing in virtual spaces. And so I love that you ask about the learning, because that's one of the parts that gets left out a lot. In this over focus on safety, we forget things like, how do we use these tools to learn? Look, these little things that we keep in our pockets are just incredible devices to help us know. It's clearly we have the world's libraries at our fingertips, but just understanding and making meaning out of the world around us. And so I love one of the tips that I suggest in the book is demonstrate, again, back to this idea of model for your kids how you can use these devices to explore and learn new things. So one silly example that I gave is at one point I was in one of my kids' rooms. We had this little bug that was kind of crawling by, and kids like, it's this bug. What is it? And so I said, hey, instead of just saying, oh, there's a bug, let's squish it or get it out of the house or whatever. I said, let's figure what type of bug do we think it is, right? So, we used the device, took a picture of it, did some Google searches. This is with one of my younger kids. We turned out it's a brown marmorated stink bug. We learned that they're an invasive species, actually, and that you really probably should kill them and not rescue them. We learned a whole bunch of just really interesting things. So now anytime we see a stink bug, it has all this meaning behind it, because we know all these things about it, and that it communicates by rubbing its legs, and that it actually likes the way it stinks, right? But it also was a powerful way to remind our kids that to model that these devices can help with creativity. And so that's what we encourage. And we actually encourage our kids to say, we want you to be using, we have a contract, and we can talk more about that later if you want, but we have a contract with our kids for using their devices. And one of the things in the contract is that they use them to learn new things that are not part of their school day, right? Yes, we want to use them for their homework, of course, but we also want them to learn that these are tools to explore and to engage and learn things that are far beyond what they would know just from talking to me, or just from hanging around their house, or just from being in their school.
Yeah. So I love the bug example. So did you use the camera on the bug to image recognition? How did you learn that this was a stink bug?
So in that case, there probably is, I don't know, there probably is a bug recognition app somewhere. We just took a picture and looked at different pictures, because you can do a cool thing. You can do reverse image search, which is kind of fun. There's a tool called TinEye, which I actually talk about in the book, where you can take a picture and see what, other pictures of it. So we just did some kind of rudimentary matching, but there are some apps. So we've done this with plants, and there's some great, Plant Snap is an app that you can use, and you just snap a picture and it'll actually come back right away and tell you what the plant is. There's another app that I love called Sky Guide. And it's fun because if you've ever been out, when I was a kid and I'd ask my parents, I'd be like, hey, see that light up in the sky? What is it? And they'd be like, oh, it's, the Neptune, zone, blah, blah, blah. It was probably Delta Flight 35 coming into land. They were just making stuff up. Well, it's really cool. And I used to do that too, by the way. What's really cool with Sky Guide is that if my kid says, hey, what is that? And you can just hold your phone up and it will show you all of the stars that you're seeing, and you can see where they are. Turned out we were looking at Venus the other night, truly, and I didn't even know you could see Venus. This is right. So all of a sudden there's all this additional meaning and value that comes into our interactions if we use the technology. But again, even more important than that, it is this reinforcement that these tools can be used to accelerate and encourage creativity, not just be used for entertainment.
Yeah. I mean, at one point you emphasized diversity in the digital diet, right? Like that kids are consuming is the wrong word, but using to kind of engage with the world. And so are those examples for, say, like Night Sky or a Sky Guide? Yeah. Would that be an example of something you like said, okay, how about trying, Sky Guide? Or did you how do you go about, because it's interesting, I think we normally think about, okay, the role of the parent is to eliminate and reduce technology. Yeah. To delete apps, to scrutinize, to hide phones and stuff like that. And I think you're saying, no, it's like sometimes it's, kind of diversifying, maybe diluting the effect of apps that are kind of not worth attention. Yeah.
I love it. Actually, I wish I had said it that way. I'm sharing a lot of these things. Of course, you also are have great insights in this and some of your own work. And so it's not surprising that you mentioned that. But one of that idea of diluting, like I love that term, and what we do often is, and I think it's a practice that we really need to change, is we let the apps that are on our kids' devices just sort of come from them, from other kids at school, from advertising. And I'm not saying it's not a problem to learn about apps that way, but if that's the only way that that apps are ending up on our kids' devices, like that's dysfunctional. That's a problem. And so, yes, that was a long way of saying, yes, I do think it's important that we are sharing and modeling new apps for our kids. In fact, one of the things that I found as a surprise as I was talking with some of the parents is I said, I realized that after talking to many parents, they were not suggesting apps for their kids. And I was like, whoa, this is a problem. So I actually started asking this question. I said, do you ever recommend books for your kids? Right. Oh, yes, absolutely. Every parent I talked to when I was working on the book, of course, you recommend books, especially if they're at one of those transition ages between like picture books and like early readers and then early readers to those small chapter books. It's really important. We always recommend books. And then I say, do you ever recommend apps to your kids? And it was like crickets, right? Like, no. And so that's something that is, I think, really, really important. We should be recommending apps to our kids. We have a responsibility, just like with food, right? If my kids, I don't know about everybody that's listening here, but if it was left to their own device, my kids would eat macaroni and cheese for 3 meals a day, right? And so one of the jobs that I have, my wife gets a lot of credit for this as a family, as parents, is to work to expand the palate, right? We're going to try some other things. Yeah, we're going to still eat macaroni and cheese sometimes. That's okay. But we're going to, dilute the macaroni and cheese, to use your word, with some vegetables and with some chicken and with some other salads. And then there's a point where they're like, oh, cool, I actually like eating a variety of foods. But if we never try to intentionally broaden the library of foods, the menu of foods, the menu of apps, we run into that very same problem where they're using, the digital equivalent of macaroni and cheese for far too long.
Yeah. And it sounds like, you mentioned the sort of the library of apps, like that could be one of the directions that libraries go, right? That you talk at the end about that these shouldn't just be kind of like storehouses for books, right? Like this should be a place to learn about how to navigate the digital world, how to develop new skills, and to diversify. In the same way, I think people do like stumbling through the aisles of the bookstore or library to discover new.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And that stumbling, sorry, one thing, I just got to comment on that. Again, just a great word that you use there. That stumbling matters, right? The process of going through and looking and exploring at different digital apps, just like we sort of wander through the aisles of a bookstore or library. And so one of the strategies that I share in the book is if your kid comes and says, hey, can I get this new app on my phone? One of the things that one of the strategists suggests is say, sure, but I want you to propose 2 other apps that aren't in whatever category that one is. So if it's a game, two other apps that aren't a game. If it's a music app, two other apps that are not a music app, right? And and even if they don't, find that they then fall in love with those other two apps, that's okay. But it's forced stumbling, right? It's like, go wander through and look at some different apps and see what's out there. And even if it's just long enough to make a couple suggestions so that I can get this other app that I want, it helps that process of just expanding that palette. So it's a great metaphor.
Great. Yeah, I think there is a way in which, maybe like the default is you have like a sort of a rut kind of experience. We need to be constantly challenging ourselves to not fall into ruts with our devices. Let's circle back to the contractors. I think you nicely shift away from the language of a contract to device agreements, which does sound, sounds much more collaborative. And this is something where I've also sort of seen this being powerful, but I really liked how, I like that. So I was wondering if you could talk about device agreements and some of the other strategies, and I'll mention some that you use, but to really get kids to think about how they're spending their attention, right, and the value of their attention. But let's start with the device agreements. Yeah.
No, I love device. And you're right. I purposely don't use the word contract because it just has this sort of legal connotation. It's fine. I mean, it essentially is a contract, but device agreement, I like the idea of it. And it also, the other term is agreement, connotes two people coming together around something. And so what we found, and this is so important, honestly, if there's only one thing that you listen to from tonight, anybody who's here, that would be this would be the takeaway is create a device agreement. And it goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning, which is when we set our conditions, when we talk about the conditions for technology use in our families, then write them down. And I recommend that the biggest mistake, the gut that we want to go to is to be very negative, right? Don't do this and don't do this. And if I see you doing this, you're going to be in trouble. And don't you share your information and don't share pictures and don't, right? So not only is that incredibly not compelling for kids, but it's also problematic because our brains don't work that way, right? This is an incredibly complex digital world that we are throwing our kids into. And to tell them what not to do, like you can't practice not doing something, right? So setting up all the things not to do. I think, my kids play the instruments, they play the piano. And you don't learn to play the piano by being told, here's all the notes not to play, right? You learn to play the piano by practicing the right notes, and then eventually you get it right. So we have to do the same thing as we set the conditions for our digital use. And so in these use agreements, keep them positive, right? And so what I like to do, and I actually included one of ours, I included one of our kids right in the book. I just copied it and flumped it in there. But I have the first section is when should you use your device? Again, I keeping it positive, not don't use your devices in these times, but when should you use your device? And we talk about when to use it, including things like our dinners, our meal times are device free, right? That's a very nice way of saying it. And also, at night when it's time to sleep, right? Our devices live in a charging station, which is out of our rooms. Out of our kids' rooms, and that's really important because if you look at the research on okay, I said there was one takeaway. There's two really important takeaways. This one is so much. I just don't know how to communicate this like emphatically enough. So much of the problems that happen when you get into the dysfunctions and the dangers and the cyberbullying happen when kids sleep with their phones in their rooms. Don't do that. There is no good reason that a kid should sleep with a phone in their room. There's none. And often the reason that I get from parents and from kids is, well, I use my phone as an alarm clock. So buy an alarm clock. I actually tried, this is true story, Margie, I tried to work with Harvard, the publisher of the book, to include a coupon in the book, like a little tear off coupon, to trade it in for an alarm clock so that you could like get an alarm. There was like a whole bunch of reasons why that wouldn't work and we couldn't do it. But that idea of like, buy a dang alarm clock. Like you don't need to use your phone as an alarm clock. Anyway, my point is, those are the sorts of things that we put into a device agreement, but it also includes, so when to use your device, that's one part of it. The other section that I always include is who to use it with. and we talk about, use it with friends. With our younger kids, we adjust these device use agreements by age. With our younger kids, we say only use it with family members, right? To connect with family. With our older kids, we say only use it we encourage you to use it with people that you already know from the physical world. And then, of course, as they get even older, we can shift that to say it can be people that you meet in the virtual world, but with these kind of caveats. And then we talk about what do you do when things go wrong. And we say, when something goes wrong, when there's some part of this agreement that you have not lived up to, here's how we resolve it. And we lay out right in that device use agreement how we're going to resolve it. And then we sign it. And we write it to the age of the kid. And every year, either around start of school, around their birthday, whatever works best for the family, we revise that. We pull it up, we read it, we say, is this still relevant? Do we need to adjust it? We adjust it. That is just such an important ground sort of framework for families, is to write out what they think what their effective digital culture is. And I promise if we can get those device use agreements set, again, it just really, really helps all kinds of problems dissipate down the road.
Yeah, I really agree with you. One person that I had interviewed a while ago had, they were using the term contract, but nonetheless, it was with a teenage daughter, and she wanted a new phone, and so they wrote the contract, and then she was more than happy to go through the contract rigmarole to get the phone. And then she talked about it with her friends at school, and many of them were then, okay, they sort of suggested it to their parents because it was a way to negotiate this, this kind of, parents had just felt like they could either say nothing. They felt like it was like their only real choice was to say no, because if they said yes, it was like they had to let go of everything.
Yes.
And so anyways, this, this document then ended up being shared in this whole little community. It became sort of viral. But
well, you said, look, it is so true that comment that you just made, and I heard that over and over again. Parents feeling like it's very binary, right? Like there's once we get the phone, it's just all over. That is not true. Right. It is absolutely not true. There are these ways to sort of transition gradually into device use. And it's so important. And so in the contract, one of the things that we put, in the device agreement, we put that you should use, we want to see you using technology to connect and engage with your friends and family. I mean, Margaret, you wrote a great article about this and talked about how technology does not have to be an isolating force. So we actually want to see them practicing using the technology to engage with their friends. It's actually almost like a requirement. We want to see it, but we want to see it used we want to see you demonstrate that you can use the technology to stay engaged and connected with your friends and family. And so that's one of those things that we put in there. And it just means that transition into technology, into having device access, has so much scaffolding. I don't like the word controls. That sounds very controlling. Has so much scaffolding around it so that it's hard for a kid to get too far off the rails.
So one of the things that I think you touched on, and the kinds of behaviors you want to see in your kids that you put in the contract, are these pro-social things, ways, use language, have become sort of, I think it's a bystander advocate, right? And maybe, and I think that's just a really important shift from the ways that most parents and most parenting guides talk about technology, which is stay safe, right? Yes. And I think, as you write about it, it's no, be a good citizen, right? And take care of others. And I'm sure that comes back, has all sorts of benefits for the individual kids as well. But I wondered if you could talk about some examples of that, and maybe, ways to kind of for parents to kind of inch towards that. Yeah.
What is fascinating as you start to spend as much time as I do teasing through the messages that we share to our kids and interviewing people and talking about this, one of the things that you will recognize is how selfish the narrative is around online safety. And it's well-intentioned. Please don't feel like I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus here, but it's a very selfish narrative. It's very much like you said, you keep yourself safe and you watch out for you, and yes, we want kids to be safe, but actually, I think we want more than that, right? we want kids, we need kids to be effective digital citizens, meaning they care about helping others be safe and creating a safe space for those around them. And so I wish that we had spent more on, and we need to, and I call for this in the book, that we spend more time helping our kids know how to move from being bystanders to upstanders. There's some really fascinating research that I include that I'll share here, which is that the vast majority of kids, 75% is what the Pew research study said, have witnessed some sort of cyberbullying or just meanness in virtual spaces. It's probably higher than that. I'm guessing those are just the kids that answered truthfully and the others lied. But there's this sort of high amount of seeing that. But the scarier part is that when they dove deeper and asked how many do anything about it when you see it, almost none did, like 90%. Did nothing, right? And it's, again, these are not bad kids. These are not bad, but they don't know what to do because the rhetoric has always been, you watch out for you. We haven't had the conversation that says, in our family, when we see somebody that's being picked on, we do something about that. We say something. We say, we don't talk about my friend like that. Or we say, those are not words that we use here, or whatever, right? We practice. Those are that conversation, that practice that we aren't having it. And so in that moment, when that meanness happens and that meanness occurs, kids don't know what to do because it hasn't been practiced. Now, the good news, here's the sort of the shine and the light of hope is it turns out that it actually doesn't take a whole lot of intervention to make most cyberbullying go away. Mm-hmm. And so the amazing thing is that if we can just help our kids learn to go from being these sort of bystanders to upstanders, just by saying something like, hey, I disagree. I think she looks great, or whatever that comment is. A lot of the time, one or two comments like that just completely dissipates what would have turned into a cyberbullying incident otherwise. So that's why it's so important. And frankly, if not for an altruistic purpose, do it because it'll help keep your kids safe, because it'll create a safer environment for them too, by focusing on being others focused. I talk about being others focused online, and that's really what we need to practice.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message that just we haven't really heard nearly enough of. I mean, I wonder about even, kind of inching up to that of whether there's value in just for kids to feel like they can say, well, I witnessed this thing that happened. I was too afraid to do anything about it because I didn't want them to call me ugly too, or I didn't want, but just to have those discussions so that maybe next time they can do something.
Yes. Like that's a huge milestone, right? You want to, your goal as parents, our goal is to get our kids to come to us when they've screwed something up, which I know sounds weird, but right, it absolutely is. So when when a kid has seen something inappropriate or done something inappropriate or watched something inappropriate and not done anything about it online, what we want to create is an environment. And that's why we can include it in our device use agreements in our family, is to say, come and talk to us when something happens. And the goal, and the good parent trick everybody knows, is do not have a reaction, right? If somebody says, I heard somebody say this thing, right? We may want to be like, what? They said what? Right? You just breathe and you say, okay, tell me more, right? Be very calm about it. But that idea of having them come to you, that's actually a really important step in knowing how to be an upstander next time. So this idea where they come and say, hey, somebody, and you can prompt these, and I gave a bunch of prompts in my book to help with this, but you can prompt these by saying, like, what did you see, what is something that you've seen somebody do, a friend of yours or somebody you do in a virtual space, that has surprised you or made you lose respect for them, right? That's a nice way, because you're like, are your friends cyberbullying other people? They'll be like, no, right? But if you're like, have you ever had somebody in a virtual space do something that made you lose respect for them, right? That's a way to start to get at the question. And they'll be like, yeah, the other day, my friend was making fun of this other kid, and you're like, wow, what did you do? And often the answer may be, nothing, I just felt badly. And that can lead into this nice conversation about what might we do, especially if a parent can follow that up with, somebody said something inappropriate on a post that I was on a thread, on a discussion forum. And I responded, and I didn't want to attack them. I just responded and said, hey, I think they had a good point. Let's be kind here, right? We can give an example of how we do it. that opens up that for the next time it happens, then the kid's prepared. And then they have a plan and a strategy for how they're going to be, engaging and creating this more healthy, safe space.
Great. I know I'm just sort of keeping an eye a little bit on time, and I want to make sure that we kind of address some of the bigger picture, right? Because we talked a lot about what parents can do. You talk a lot in the book about what schools should be doing, what parents should be pushing schools to do. But then there's also the elephant in the room is like, what should the technology companies do? And I know you are actively involved in discussions and advising technology companies. And there's, the most recent blow up, of course, is with some of Facebook's products, right, and features. And I wonder, in particular, as I think about Instagram, something like Instagram, which, is, is image based. It largely consists of pictures of people's bodies, and there's a lot of social comparison that happens as people use the app, and in particular as adolescent girls use the apps. And so I'm wondering if you can talk at all about how you think those products or those companies should be addressing this issue.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I've been getting that question a lot, as you can imagine, in the last couple of days. But one thing I need to say as a caveat first, I will answer that question because it's important, but as a caveat, one of the things that I think we want to do, this gut, is like, just make those platforms fix their problems, right? And then everything will be fine. And in a second, I will tell you, there are problems that those platforms need to fix. Like, let's be clear. But it's important to note that a lot of that stems from conversations that we also need to be having to prepare our kids before they go onto a platform like Instagram or Snapchat or something like that. Because if that one platform fixes the problem, it's just going to pop up somewhere else on another platform. So yes, we got to hold those platforms accountable. But we also need to be preparing our kids. One conversation I think that is essential. And by the way, if you don't have this turned on, so one of the great features, whether you're using an iPhone or an Android phone, there's a feature that you can turn on, parents can turn on, where all apps have to be approved on a kid's device before it shows up. And again, that's not to be controlling. It's because it forces a conversation. And so when a kid comes and says they can't just download an app, they have to request it. And so it's an opportunity to say, hey, what do you think about that app? Is that good? Does it align with our family culture for technology? It just prompts a conversation. So if in that process, a request for something like Snapchat or Instagram or any of these kind of photo-based sharing tools comes, it's a great moment to talk about some things. And one of the things that you absolutely have to talk about is the concept of highlight reels, and the idea that what you're seeing is the best of somebody else's life. And that's okay. There's no problem with that. But you have to realize that they're also taking out the trash and doing the dishes and fighting with their brother and having to do homework and all that other stuff. They're just not showing pictures of it. And so that context is super, super important. So it's important to make sure that we know that there's stuff that we have to do in order to make sure those online spaces are.
And have you found that has like an inoculating effect to, like, say with a teenage daughter, to say that these are highlight reels that,
Absolutely. And it's not a one and done. It takes some reminding. It takes some, but it just gives context, right? It's social media for the most part isn't bad. It's actually really awesome in a lot of ways. You can stay in touch with family and friends. You can share great stuff. You can be part of a global community. It's great. But if without the appropriate context, that's where it gets really, really nutso. So yes, providing that can be really helpful. But I want to get back to the first part of your question, which is what can these platforms do? Because they have got to do more. And there are some things that I outline in the book that we need to be advocating for. A couple of them. One is verifying the identity of users. It is a big problem. Look, on Facebook, half of the users are bots. Half of the times you're arguing with somebody, hopefully people on here are not doing that, but when you see these nasty arguments going back and forth, it's not even with a human. It's just riling up people to anger. And so just verifying identity of people is a big step that can happen. Another thing that can make a big difference is what I call signposting. Mm-hmm. So this is an idea that we take from the physical world. If you notice, when you go to a park, in the park, there's a sign that's like, hey, keep our park clean, right? Please don't litter. But when you drive across the country, have you ever driven across the country, there's those pass it on signs, that are like, they have the different, kindness, pass it on. I was in the metro the other day in DC. I live in Washington, DC, and there's these signs, if somebody's sick, help them off the metro, right? Like that's signposting. It's reminding people the norms of our interaction in shared community spaces. That same model can be applied very easily in virtual spaces. Why not, on Snapchat or on Instagram, why not have a prompt that says, hey, have you posted something, a kind, comment about somebody else's post today? Have you taken a picture of you doing an act of service or an act of kindness? Some of you have heard of this delicious licks thing that's going on, this ridiculous like challenge to steal stuff and vandalize schools. That same principle is just as powerful when you flip it and turn it in a positive way. And so those prompts, having the software platforms prompt users or adults or kids to be using the platforms in those meaningful ways, guide them, scaffold them to do it. That can be really powerful, and it's super easy to do. It doesn't even take much redesigning of the tools. Anyway, I could give like 10 more, but those are a couple examples.
Yeah. Great. I think I'm sure more questions related to that topic will come up. Why don't we turn to some of those, and I'll ask you one that which is like, what age do you think it's appropriate for a child to have a smartphone and a social media account?
Okay, well, we'll take social media account separate for a second. But so my answer to that is going to be, I think, surprise people. I actually think the younger, the better. But before people's heads explode, you got to understand something about devices. And so one of these challenges, we talked a little bit about this earlier, is that there's this really binary approach to devices. It's like nothing, bam, have a cell phone that has access to everything in the world all at once. That is way too much. It's like having a kid, never ride a bike, never drive in a car, never take driver's ed, and then just suddenly hand them a key to like a fully functioning car. Of course they're going to crash. Like, how could we even be surprised when they crash, right? And so one of the things that we need to do with our devices is spread out that experience to make it not binary, but gradual. So I recommend starting with younger kids. And I'm not going to give an exact age because it depends on the kid. It really does. But younger kids in elementary school, certainly, I think it's appropriate. But we give them devices with no data plan, right? So they get used to, because what we want to do is we want to give them opportunities to develop trust and develop experience. It's that idea of practicing. You can't practice not doing something, so we got to give them chances to practice. So we give often in our family, it's a hand-me-down phone that we used to have. So we give them a phone. We remove 90% of the apps from it. And so it's a phone that has no data plan, so they can use Wi-Fi. It has a text messaging app where the contacts are probably just their family, a couple fun games, a camera app, maybe a notepad. That's about it, right? And that's what they do. Oh, by the way, I should mention in our device use agreements, one of the things that we include, one of the requirements is that our kids help capture family memories and moments. So we want them. I'm terrible at taking pictures. If we go on a family trip, when we get back, I haven't taken a single picture. And so we outsource that to our kids. So they know part of the deal of having a device is they help take pictures. And in their notepads, they write down funny things that happen or that our families say. And then periodically we get together and kind of review those. So that's what an initial phone is. It's a data plan free, very few device apps on it. Then over time, as our kids get older, we're going to say, hey, you've been doing this pretty responsibly. Why don't we try adding another app? And we might add another app to their phone. Maybe we add YouTube with again, some conversations about appropriate use. Maybe down the road, we get to a point where we're going to say, we're going to add a web browser, but again, with some conversation. Then at some point, we're going to say, I think you're at the age and you've seen, it's less about age, but again, more about trust, that we're going to put a data plan on your phone. But again, here's the expectations of it. And then we're going to add some additional apps. And then I think, social media apps are kind of the last to add because they require more brain development, frankly, to use appropriately. So that's a long way of saying this. The idea is getting a phone should be a process that happens over years. And it should happen with a phone that's very locked down, in the sense that there's very little, again, less locked down, but just very little that it can do. It's very simple. You can't crash the thing too much because there aren't many ways to go wrong. And then slowly add additional function, additional features, until by the point that, you know, you're in at the end of high school, certainly you want basically a fully functioning phone, because at that point you want them really showing that they have the ability to use this thing without any restrictions before they're then off on their own.
Great. Yeah, I think your initial answer to that is probably surprising to many people, that you'd start as early as possible.
Yeah. And it's funny because people are like, well, wait a minute, I think this is dangerous. Yes. Anything that has the potential to be risky, you actually want more scaffolding, right? So you actually want, you know, it's not that I'm pushing phones on really young kids. It's that you want lots of time to scaffold. And so you can't, if you start when they're in 10th grade, right? You don't have enough time. You do not have enough time to give them the scaffolding and build the trust before they're off on their own and they're going to crash. And so lots of slow over time scaffolding, a long trajectory with lots of support. That's what you want to do.
Great. The next question is, to what extent do you see government policy being involved in the online life of a child?
There's a lot of places we could take that question. I mean, look, I feel like I think of government as having sort of two big roles, provide and protect. And when we think about providing, I think it's really important that the government policy is stepping up to correct from some natural market forces and make sure that there is equitable access, right? Equitable access to connectivity, equitable access to appropriate information, that certain materials, because of ad revenue or whatever, aren't being pushed over other more reliable information, right? Like though there are some basic, providing goals that need to happen from government. The second side is the protect side. And that's really important. So right now, the only real law around protecting students online, as kids online, is called SIPA. It's basically a Internet Protection Act. It forces you to provide filtering, but it puts all the onus on schools. So schools have to do all the filtering, all this work. That's so crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Why don't the internet providers, the internet platforms, have to step up and do this? And so that's an area where I would love to see public policy do more and have more responsibility on the providers of these systems. Look, if you look at traditional media, right? Traditional, any news, sort of CNN, NBC, whatever, any news, print news media, right? They are all responsible. If they print something that is intentionally misleading, that is slanderous or discriminatory, they are on the hook for that. They are actually required. There's legal action that can be taken, and yet none of those rules apply to our digital media platforms, our social media platforms, et cetera. And I just scratch my head and I go, why? Why on earth shouldn't they be held at least to the same standard as other media sources when the number one source of our news, of our media, is now social media platforms? To be clear, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be able to hear opposing viewpoints, even frankly viewpoints that we don't like. We need that. We need to hear opposing viewpoints. We need to hear people who think differently from us. But the idea that there should be no responsibility on the quality of the content, on the what could be potentially damaging content, that's just crazy. And that's because government has not stepped up and created any sort of guidelines to hold the tech platforms' feet to the fire. And we got to advocate for it. It's starting to happen. I think finally, after so much time, I think people are realizing this is crazy, that we've basically given this free reign to tech platforms. But we gotta rethink that.
Is there some place, like if people who are listening want to get involved in that? Is there some organization that you think has the most momentum now that they can give input to? Or
I mean, it is actually a great time. And having worked on the Hill, so I used to work for Senator Patty Murray, actually from Washington State. Often you see that, call your senator, call your representative, and a lot of times, that stuff it's fun to say, but it doesn't have a whole lot of impact. I will tell you right now, given the agenda that's happening on the, sort of the political agenda and what, policies are being considered, this is a really, really meaningful time to call your elected representatives and say, it is important that you look at ways to provide safe spaces in virtual spaces for our families. That will mean something now. It wouldn't have a couple years ago, but now it will. It really will matter. So please make that call or send a note. It's important. It's not just about being safe only. There's other aspects of it, like advertising. There is absolutely no guidelines. So on traditional media, there's guidelines for what ads you can play on children's programming, on children's television. None of that applies when you're watching YouTube videos, when you're watching other things. And I think you may have seen this if you were watching a happy little cartoon with your kid, and then all of a sudden an advertisement for alcohol or an advertisement for a really inappropriate movie comes on. You're like, whoa, like all this. So that's an area where we could really use some help. And then also just data privacy, right? Right now, there's very, very little legal recourse that you can do when your data is used for basically to feed you advertising. Honestly, what we're doing, we're stealing our kids' identity to feed them ads to make money for somebody else. Like, it's just nutso. I don't know how else to say it, but now is a great time to make that your voice heard and say to our elected leaders, you got to step up. You got. And
elected leaders at what level? Like, so if someone lives in Seattle, or is it like King County representatives? Is it senators? Is it? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it really is. I think there's because it builds and momentum comes from all levels, but definitely state and national. So your congressional delegation, that is a really powerful group to reach out to at this point, because they are thinking about these issues. And the other thing I would say is, don't forget to share this with the platforms themselves. It's interesting. I think often we think that they're not listening. They know that they're dependent on us for users. And if we say, we're done with this, then they're in trouble. And so going and filling out, every platform has feedback forms. Go and fill out those feedback forms and say, I need controls that helps make this safer for my family. I need to have tools that I can control advertising better, whatever the thing is. And I give out 30 ideas in the book about specific things to ask for, but whatever thing you really feel passionate about, make that known both to the companies themselves and to your elected leaders.
One last thing I wanted to ask was, for parents who want to get want to be more effective in the way they guide their children through the digital world and do that in ways that are supportive and contemporary, right? The strategies that you have in the book are amazing, but the technology features change day by day. Yeah. The world changes, and strategies have to change along with them. So are there forums that you know of that parents, maybe kids too, can consult each other or advise each other about what to do in particular predicaments or dilemmas of how to take care of kids and how to support kids in being active digital citizens and helpful digital citizens?
Look, that I hope you can tell through this conversation, I'm generally very optimistic. I have a very positive view on our future and our digital future. This is one area where I wish I had a better answer for you. There just are not nearly enough conversations about this happening. Every PTA in the country should be having this conversation, right? Certainly community groups, churches, community organizations should be having this. They're not. The part of the reason I wrote the book truly, and I mentioned earlier that I listed at the end of every chapter, there's all these questions to ask to start conversations. Yeah. The one goal that I had, it's funny, when I was writing the book, when the publisher said, like, what's your goal? Like afterwards, would you want to like start a business from this? Do you want to just sell a lot of books? Do you want to like, what do you want to do? And I was like, my goal, I have one goal. It's to start a new conversation. And a better conversation. And so that's what we have to do, is just start. I wish I could point to a bunch of places where, where we could, where you could go, and they're not there. So I need you to create them. I need you to create them in your schools. I need you to create them in your community organizations, and talk a lot more about what are these tools and these approaches.
Great. I noticed just one more question that I think would be good to get to. You've talked about the device agreement, and says that being collaborative, and your kids having an opportunity to shape some of the terms. Yeah. But one question is, what are consequences when kids don't stick to those agreements?
Yeah, it's a great question. And they won't, by the way. Like if they never have any problems with it, then you probably haven't come up with a pretty good agreement, right? It should be pushing a bit. And so the most important thing is to not have it be, nobody's freaking out, nobody's getting angry. We're just saying, hey, and again, what we want to do, one of the great things about the agreements is it takes away the sort of good cop, bad cop thing. It's not me versus you. It's like we go back to the agreement. We say, hey, let's you and me together look at the agreement. This is the thing that happened. Do we agree that that's not in line with what we both signed on this? Yeah, we do. Okay. So when that happens, what we do is we pull back a little bit. We take some breaks from using our devices. You're not in trouble per se, but we're going to take some breaks. Maybe an app, if there's an app that really has gotten out of balance, it's being used way more than it should be to keep a healthy balance in your tech appetite, like we talked about. Maybe we say, let's delete that app for a while and let you have a chance to show that you can live by this agreement that we've come to. And then after a while we say, hey, let's bring that responsibility back. Let's give you more opportunity to bring that app back that was causing trouble before, or say, hey, have the device back again. But that's what you want to do, is you want to have a clear understanding between when the contract is, when the device agreement is not being held to, then some of the opportunities that are in there get pulled back. And then after a while, if there's trust with that smaller set of opportunities, then we add more opportunities to it.
I see. So it sounds like, part of the art of creating a meaningful device agreement is having opportunities for failure.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And then I guess each year, it sounds like, at least annually, you update these device agreements. And then is part of it to make more kind of like challenging requirements? Like
I would say it's more challenging, but it's more challenging because you are giving more opportunities. So what we're saying is, we say, look, we looked over this last year. Yeah, at first, when we first sort of did this, remember there was a couple of times we had to have a little phone break for a bit, but look, in the last 6 months, you've been doing a great job of this. And so, maybe we're at the point now, what do you think, where we say, hey, let's install a web browser on your phone and have you have access to that, right? And so now along with that comes greater responsibility. And so, yes, it's a challenge because there's more of a responsibility, but it's also more opportunity. And so that's the thing that you want to keep sort of growing. You don't want to give too much at once because that's overwhelming. It's too much for a kid's brain that's developing. A little bit, see how they do. When we're good, yep, we've developed trust, we're using, well, great. Now let's take that next step and then slowly take those steps together with occasionally a little mini step back to reset, and take those steps together until they're at a point where they're fully using all of the devices on the phone with a healthy balance, not playing a single game for 8 hours a day or 5 hours a day. That's not good balance. We want to see that balance of activities, that good, appropriate digital citizenship behavior. And as we see that, that's when we know that they are really set to use these devices to enrich their life and become, great, creative, engaged people.
Great. There is one additional question that I know the answer is yes to it, but you can say more, which is, do you include app recommendations in the book? And think you give some pointers to organizations that, yeah.
I do. So it's tricky because I have, there's so many apps. There's some great apps out there. I was hesitant. I actually had a whole bunch in the book. And one of the things that are, that the Harvard team did is they said, we really need to pull most of those out because it changes so fast. It'll date the book. And so I do provide a couple examples in there, but what I tried to do instead was talk about types of apps. So here's types of categories of app. There's so many great citizen science apps where you can actually like the plant identifier or the sky guide. I mean, those are really cool things that you can do. There's also some great apps that can be used for what we call microactivism. So kids that can engage with their communities. I tell a story about a kid who used a change.org, which is a site to call out Jamba Juice for using these big styrofoam cups that were horrible for the environment. And this kid got a bunch of people signed up and said, this is a big deal. And actually Jamba Juice listened and changed to recyclable paper cups, right? Like there's so many great apps that can help do things like that. The more important thing than just the list of apps that I provide are some types of questions to ask when deciding whether an app is good, a useful app or not. Things like, how does it make money? Does it make money through ads? Does it make money through subscriptions? Does it make money by trying to get you to buy other apps? What is the purpose of the app? How does it make you feel? Who does it let you interact with? And are we okay with that? Is it something that is appropriate for somebody to use without parent coaching and engagement? So maybe I'm sidestepping the answer a little bit by not giving a list of all my favorite apps, but I do share some of those strategies because I think the more important thing is just to always be thinking about how do we evaluate the apps because the individual apps are changing all the time.
And you actually have your kids give you like app pitches, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Can you say just a little bit about that? Because I think that's so clever on many levels, but yeah.
Sure. So there's two ways. We talked on one way about me needing to recommend apps to our kids, right? Which is important. But the other way is more important. We don't just want like, will you download this app on my phone? Why? Because everybody else in school has it, right? Like that's not a good reason to use it. So one of the things that we talk about is what are the elements that we consider to be a good app? It's these things that I just talked about, right? Is it a good use of your time? Does it have lots of advertising? Does it have inappropriate content? And what we do is we get our kids pitch us on the apps, like as if they're doing a startup and asking for funding. It's like a little pitch, and they say, "Hey, here's the app. Here's why I think it's you should approve it." And they list out the couple reasons. This doesn't have to take like an hour. We're not trying to grill them. They don't have to make like a PowerPoint presentation, but it's this idea that they're not just coming and say, "Hey, can I have this app?" They're coming and say, "Hey," and if they do, the immediate question I get back is, "Why do you think you should have the app?" And so they get used to, there's this habit. Now I don't even have to ask it. They just come and say, "Hey, here's this app. I think I should get it because it looks like it's a lot of fun. It doesn't have many ads. I don't think it's going to distract me from a lot of other stuff." And then if I have questions, I'll ask the questions back and forth. And sometimes it's a slam dunk. We're like, "Yeah, let's get the app, go for it." Sometimes it's clearly no. And sometimes it's in the middle and we say, "Yeah, I don't know. Why don't we do a trial period for it? Why don't we try it for a week? And then in a week, let's see how it's doing. If it's now all of a sudden taken over all of your activities are focused on playing this app all the time, maybe we need to pull it off, but let's try it for a week and see." So that's kind of this idea of pitching, is getting kids to come and pitch apps, which is, by the way, exactly the same process we want them to do to themselves when they're out of the house, right? When they see a new app, when they're off in college or other parts of their lives, they want to be going through that mental pitching process. Does this app, does it look good for me? Does it look like it'll be helpful? So it reinforces that concept from a very early age.
Yeah, I think, yeah, just it also seems to set you kind of set you up as a team with your kid, like evaluating the app.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned organizations like Common Sense Media, and I forget the others, but do you think that they provide a kind of do they periodically review apps? And
they do.
Okay,
they do. Common Sense Media is awesome.
Yeah.
I call them out in the book. I love Common Sense Media. We work very closely with them. Our team at ISTE, we have a kind of a journal, an education news organization called EdSurge, which is free. You can sign up for it. It keeps just news on the education industry. But we have something called the Product Index, where we rate and review apps. So between the EdSurge Product Index and the Common Sense Media reviews, it's pretty good. But the thing you got got to remember is every kid is different. And truly, and what works for, my son isn't going to work for my daughter, isn't going to work for your kid. And so yes, those are good tools to sort of get general ideas about apps and what other people are saying. But when it comes down to it, it's really going to depend on what your kids' interests are, what their level of responsibility is, and how they're using their devices. And you got to make that call on an individual basis.
Great. Well, I want to thank you so much. It's just been a great opportunity to learn more from you. And it's been an honor to have this whole hour. So thank you.
Thank you. The honor has been mine. It's been such a fun conversation. And thanks to everybody who is joining us tonight and for the great questions that you asked. I really appreciate the opportunity. And just thank you. Thank you for being interested in this topic that is just so incredibly important for our future.
Agree.
I have enjoyed this talk so much, and I couldn't help but think through, the ways that this is all very good for adults too. I think we all get very lazy, and kids make us be more on top of ourselves and treating technology well. So thank you so much. I want to thank the audience as well. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your questions. Please use the link in the chat to purchase the book through Third Place Books. They're our local bookseller tonight. And we want to support them. So if you can do that, that would be great. Richard and Margie, thank you so much again. And I hope that you have a great night, and we'll see you again.
Thank you. See ya.